Okay, we are now ready to go. We're up to the new Mishnah. It's a little bit of a confusing situation today, but Bez Hashem, we're going to get through it with flying colors. It's going to be soft like flour. Hakayim is a mincha. If someone does kmitza on the mincha with a machshava of pigel, what was the machshava of pigel? Lechol shiareha, to eat the shirayim, or lahaktir kaimtza, or to be matter the kmitza lemocher. So that is a classic case of chutz lizmanai. The halacha is moide Rabbi Yosy bozeh shu pigel. Here your braysi would be moide that it's pigel. Bechayavan Allah kares, and you'll be chayav kares. So this is a little bit of an unusual situation because normally the Gemara, the Mishnah will quote a machlokes, and then the Mishnah will bring another case that here one of the two are moide. Here it says moide, but it doesn't tell me where the machlokes was. Welcome to Kachim. Lahaktir levaynasa lemacher. What if someone made a kmitza and he had kavana that the levona, because we know you have to be makter levona as well. He's going to do that tomorrow. That was a chutz lizmanai. There, Rabbi Yosy apostle ve'ein boikaris, and I'm going to tell you what that means is that it's not pigel. It's only midrabanon aser. The chachamim ma'amrim pigel v'chayavin al karis. So now you know where Rabbi Yosy was moed. The Mishnah represents it in the opposite fashion, but of course the Gemara does ask the kasha. So let's just go back a second. I just want to break down the mincha into its individual components because that's all going to come out in the next 2 days. So number one, we know that the halacha by pigel is that if while you're in the process of doing the matir, such as the shchita, such as the kabbalah, such as the halacha or the zrika, those are the things that are matir. What are they matir? They're matir the davar hanitar. What is the davar hanitar? Either the emurim to be able to be placed on the mizbeach, or the basar to be able to eat it. So the definition of pigel is if while you're doing a davar hamatir, you have kavana to do anything chutz lizmanui, right? So you have kavana to either by the shchita you could have kavana to spritz the blood chutz lizmanui. That would also make it pigel. And the spritzing the blood is also davar matir. So the machshava of pigel could be on either a davar hamatir, or it could be on a davar aniter. But what becomes osir, we learned, is only the davar aniter. In other words, dam will never be osir as pigel. Might be osir as dam, but it will never be osir as pigel because dam is a davar matir. So the machshava of pigel is while you're doing any one of the primary avodas, typically 4 avodas, if you had kavana to do either one of the future avodas or to deal with the davar ha-nitar, so to eat the meat of the carbon out of bounds, or to be makriv on the mizbech, the carbon is out of bounds, that is going to be pigel, right? So those are broken up into parts. So now there's a davar hamatir, right? There's a davar hanitar. And it's important to keep focus of these components because it's going to come out a little bit more relevant as we develop this. So let's look at this Mishnah again. Hakayim is a mincha.
By mincha, what's the davar niter?
The davar niter is the kmitza that you're going to place on the mizbeach, and the shirayim that the kohen will eat.
What's the davar matir?
The kmitza itself, the placing it into the klisharis, the halacha, and the haktar is both, right? Because the haktar is feeding the mizbeach, but the haktar is also connected to zrikas dam.
What about the levona? Where does that come in?
The levona, I'm happy you brought that up because that's what I was focusing on. The levona is a davar hamatir. So by the mincha, thank you for bringing it up. That's what I was getting at, and I totally forgot the main point. Mincha is a very interesting scenario because it has dual parallel matirim. Because in order to be matir the shirayim lachila, you have to be matir the koimetz, and you have to be matir the levona. So there's the question of pigel b'chatzi matir. Do you have to be doing the full matir to be able to make something pigel? Or could I make something pigel when I'm doing half of the matir? When I'm placing the kmitza on the mizbeach, that's only half the matir. Because I still have to place the levona on the mizbeach. So that's the movement. Thank you for bringing it up. That's what I was trying to bring out. That by mincha, it's not typical of what you'd find by a carbon because there's a dual matir. And now the question is, how does that impact pigel? And that's going to come out. So Akar mitzvahs mincha lechol shiureha. So the avoida, the davar hamatir that you were doing was the ma'aseh kmitza. Lechol shiureha is the davar haniter. You had kavana to eat the davar haniter chutz l'zmanai. Oy lahak nekoim salamacher. Lahak nekoim is connected to zrika. So that's you're doing one davar hamatir with the kavanah to do the next step davar hamatir or a future step davar hamatir out of bounds. So there, moidir Rabbi Yosy bozeshu pigel v'chayoven alov kares, but lahakti levainos alamacher. So while I'm making the kmitza on matir A, I have kavanah to be matir B, the equal but parallel matir lemacher. So there Rabbi Yosy holds that's not pigel. We're going to need to know why Rabbi Yosy holds that's not pigel. But clearly Rabbi Yosy holds that matir A will not be impacted by a machshov of pigel relevant to matir B. So the kmitza will not become posel, and it won't make the whole carbon posel if by the kmitza you had kavanah to do something bad with matir B. Right? That's clearly what Rabbi Yosy holds. So therefore, if it's such a scenario, then it's possible of ein by cars. And the Gemara is going to tell us tomorrow that this is because of the gzeira. So be'etzim it's not pigel. Rabbi Yosy says, "Midrabanan we're going to be machmer," and the Gemara says, "Why will we be machmer? Because if we tell a person that during the kmitza v'yat kavana to be maked to the Levona out of bounds, it's kosher 100%. We're afraid someone's going to say, okay, so I'll do the same with the kmitza. I'll make a kmitza, I will not to be maked to the kmitza out of bounds. Thinking that what's the difference? The Levona out of bounds is not a problem. Maybe the kmitza out of bounds is not a problem. When the kmitza out of bounds is possible v'yesh b'karis. So they were geyser, even if it's really not pickle at all, but we're going to answer it. It's regular pickle. It's regular pickle. In other words, even though I'm in the middle of a voida A, of matir A, and my kavanah of pickle was for matir B, they're interchangeable. And having a kavanah of pickle by matir B will answer matir A and make the whole carbon pickle the chayavin of course. Amr loy, so the Rabbanan told, the Chachamim told Rabbi Yosy, why would you disagree with us? Why is this any different than a regular carbon? Ma shini yuzeh min hazevach. You have a carbon, and you're going to do the zrika, you'll do the zrika al-manas to eat the meat chutz l'zmanai. It's all different things. There's the dam, there's the shchita, there's the emurim. It's also different components, and one impacts the other. Amr lehen, Rabbi Yosy said there's a very big difference. Shazevach, damoi, uvesari ve'emurav. Yes, they're all individual components. But get what? Echad. It's all from one behema. It's all from one unit. Levona, the Levona is something separate. There's the flour, and the Levona is a completely separate part. It's not one part. If it's two parts of the same entity, I would hear one will impact the other. But this is a completely different thing. It's a completely different ingredient. Okay, so that is the Mishnah. Frak the Gemara, Lamali lemisna moidi Rabbi Yosy bezu. Why would he say moidi bezu? Where is he ever arguing? So the Gemara, because of the Seifa, mishum de kaboy lemisna Seifa. About in the Seifa, the Mishnah quotes a machlokes between Rabbi Yosy and the Chachamim. Therefore, in the Reisha, the Mishnah tells us that in this particular case, with the kaimet itself, even Rabbi Yosy holds that it's pigel. Okay. Mishum de kaboy lemisna Seifa lakta levoinosa lemacher. Rabbi Yosy Amar Pasol ve'ein beikaris Mao detema. I would have mistakenly thought that what is the reasoning behind Rabbi Yosy's halacha is not because of what I said earlier, that one matter doesn't affect the other matter. Rather, Talmid Rabbi Yosy, mishum de kasover ein mefaglin de chatzi matter. If there's two materim here that are side by side that both have to be done, and you only add a machshavas pigel by half of what's required, right? Because they're two parallel things. It's not like a sequential thing where there's no problem of chatzi matir, because by the shchita that's the only thing that needs to be done. By the kabbalah that's the only thing that needs to be done. By the kmitza that's the only thing that needs to be done. But by the aktar is the only place where you have a parallel avodah that needs to be done. you would have thought that whenever two things have to be done, then the machshava of pigul has to be by both of them. You can't just have a machshava of pigul by one of them. If you had kavana during the kmitza that I'm going to sai be makter the koymet chutz l'zmanoi and sai be makter the levona chutz l'zmanoi, that's a full matter. My machshava is pigul on the full matter, but half and half doesn't work. If that would have been the svara of Rabbi Yossi, then he would have argued in the Reish as well. Because what's the difference if he had kavana to be makter the koymet at the wrong time, which is not including the levina, or if he had kavana to be makter the levina at the wrong time, where he wasn't including the koymet? You need both. Ein mefaklin b'chatzi matir. And therefore, maybe he would argue v'afilu reisha nami. So you would have mistakenly thought the reasoning for Rabbi Yossi was ein mefaklin b'chatzi matir, and then it should apply equally whether or not he had kavanah to be makter the koymet, shaloi l'shma, or shchut l'zmanoi, or the levayin chut l'zmanoi kamash malon. My camera now went bad. This computer is getting very sick. It's causing me true insidious over here. Let me try this one more time. Did I get it back? I got it back. I have to be very gentle now because if he gets a little bit rough, it shuts off. Okay. Zog to Gemara Kamash Malon the Bahamoida. Now, what is the reasoning for Rava? So Rashi is kind enough to share it with us. Let's look at the top Rashi. Kamash Malon the Bahamoida. The time of love b'shemachiu. It's not because of ein mefagel b'chatzi matir. El mishum the mefarish lakamon ein matir mefagel matir, which is what I mentioned. Excuse me, when we learned the Mishnah. Gewaltig. Lahakter levaynasa lemacher. Rabbi Yossi Omer posel ve'ein baikaris. Amar Reish Lakish. Zogt Reish Lakish pshat in Rabbi Yossi. Omer hayer Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi used to say ein matir mefagel es hamatir. One matir will not be mefagel b'other matir, which is exactly what we just said. And Rashi explains, ein avoidas matir zeh kegoin koymetz, which is the kmitza that requires aktara, moy elast lefagel matir acher halavoina b'machshava shu mechashav al halavoina avoidas a koymetz. So the avoida of the avoida that is working on the part of the carbon, that's the flour and the oil part, that will not be impacted by a machshava of pigul that's on a different part of the carbon, which is the mater B, the parallel mater of levoina. One is not impacted by the other. Okay, Gavaldik. But avada, even chatzi mater would make pigul, and therefore, if during the kmitza you had kavana to be makter the kmitza chutz l'zmanoi, that avada would be pigul. Zogt Reish Lakish, if that's the case, then Rabbi Yossi's halacha should also apply by the lechem aponim. By the lechem aponim, there were two baziche levoina, and these two baziche levoina, we're going to look at also like two separate matirin. Just like by a regular mincha, the koymet that you have to be makter and the levoina that you have to be makter, here it's bazach A of levoina and bazach B of levoina. One will not impact the other. Nechenat ha'emer b'shnei baziche levoina shalechem aponim she'ein matir mefagel es hamatir. Rashi explains specifically what the case is. Shem hikter echad mi baziche lechem aponim, if while you're being makter, one of the bazichin al manas lahaktir achar lemachar, while you're being makter bazich 1, you had kavanah that bazich 2 you're going to be makter tomorrow, which is chutz zmanoi, ein machshava lefagel, for the same reason, is that ein matir mefagel es hamatir. Okay. Fragt Gemara, my v'chein not timer. It's exactly the same thing. Why do I need Reish Lakish to tell me that this would be a similar case? It's identical. It's two parallel materials. Zok Gemara, I'll tell you why. Ma'od tema the Rabbi Yossi b'levoina. Why in our Mishnah did he say that levoina, the machshava by levoina, won't impact the mincha itself? Mishum delav mina de minchahu. It's not wheat. It's a spice. Avo b'shnei bazicha levaina. They came from the same bag. You just put one into one spoon and one into the other spoon. But they're really one and the same. They were just packaged differently after you took them out of the bag. You probably took them out of the same bag to fill up the mazichin, right? The mina, the hadadin, they're identical. So just because they're in two separate cups, that makes them two separate material. Ema mafagli hadadi, maybe you do look at them as one. Kamash malon, you don't look at them as one. So what this brought out is something very, very clear. That Rabbi Yosy's svara has nothing to do with the fact that the Levona is different from the Mincha. Because even though it was exactly the same as the Mincha, all that's significant is that it's a co-parallel matir. It's irrelevant what it's made out of. It's irrelevant that it's more of the same. But since it's staged and it's presented as a co-parallel matir, the kavana, when you're working on man matir, will not be impacted by a kavana of pigol regarding the other matir. Frank the Gemara, but that's not true. Umi matas amrit, time of Rabbi Yosy b'Levona, lav mishum the lav mini the minchi. Rish Lakish just taught us that the reasoning for Rabbi Yosy is not because one is Levona and one is flour. That's not the reason. And that's why he said it applies equally to the Shnei Bozich Levona of the Lechem Apanim. But the problem is, if you read the words in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yosy says pretty clearly that that's exactly what his reasoning is because it's two different species. One's wheat and oil, and the other one is a spice. What does it say in the Mishnah? We just learned it. Vakatani Seifa. Amrulai, the Chacham told him, why would you say by the case of the Levona that it's not pigel? Ma shinsa min hazevach. Why is it any different than when you're spritzing the dam, you have kavanah batei murim? And what did he answer back? Amrulai hazevach damoyu v'sar v'mur v'echad u'levona eina min mincha. So that's exactly what he's saying. You're telling me that's not Pshat in Rabbi Yosy. That's exactly what Rabbi Yosy says. Zog to Gemara, you're taking it too literal. When he says u'levona eina min mincha, he's not talking about its chemical composition, that it's a different item. No, halachically, it's not tethered to the mincha, and I'll explain to you what I mean. The shirayim are tethered to the Torah mincha. Why? Because until you're makter the shirayim, until you makter the kaimitz, you cannot eat the shirayim. But levona is not tethered to the kaimitz. You could be makter the levona before the kaimitz. You could be makter the levona after the kaimitz. You could be makter the levona whenever you want. It's completely independent and not tethered. So when he says it's two minim, he didn't mean that literally its chemical composition is different. It's a different compound. No, halachically it's not tethered. And if that's the case, even if you have two bazich levona, halachically they're not tethered to one another. Each one you bring independent of the other. It doesn't make a difference that their physical makeup is identical. So zog to Gemara, ma eina min mincha, eina beikov mincha. It's not tethered to the mincha. The lav ki hechi di ma'akav lu kaimitz l'shirayim. It's not like the relationship between the kaimitz and the shirayim. The kama, the loy miskater kaimitz, loy misach l'shirayim. It's not like that relationship, that you cannot eat the shirayim until the kaimitz was placed onto the mizbeach. Hachanami ma'akav lo l'levoida. So too, the levona cannot be placed on the mizbeach until the kaimitz is placed on the mizbeach. No, it's totally independent. El iboy hay makta bereisha, v'iboy hay makta bereisha. It's completely untethered, and therefore it would equally apply to the shnei baziche levona. Let's see Rashi. Eina beikov mincha, kloimar la'olam taima mishum de'ein mater mefagel asamater, which is what we're maintaining. That is the svara of why Rabbi Yosy holds that when you had kavanah of pigol by the levona, it will not impact pigol when you're working on the kaimitz. V'hachi kamar lehu hazevach kuloi echad, by a carbon, the zevach is kuloi echad, v'adam hu mater esay murim, and the dam is mater the murim. So even though it's physically a different thing, but the emurim are tethered to the dam because they rely on the zrika in order for the emurim to be able to be brought on the mizbeach. Hilchach ki chishev al hemurim chutz manoi b'shas avodas dam. Therefore, if you think of being maktir the emurim chutz manoi while you're doing the dam, since they're tethered to each other, lav shnei matirin. I don't call it shnei matirin. Aval levona eina ma'akvis mincha bichlal ikov shirayim. the Levona is not ma'akav the mincha like the shirayim are tethered to the mincha. The eina koimetz ma'akav Levona mi lehaktira, as the Gersa changes. The koimetz doesn't prevent us from being ma'akav the Levona. Ki heiche the ma'akav shirayim, like the koimetz is ma'akav the shirayim. Hilchach have a Levona matir b'fnei atzma. The Levona is a completely independent item. The Omar ein matir mefagel as a matir. One matir will not be mefagel another matir. Gewaltig. That is the svar Rabbi Yosy. But the Rabbanan argue, and the Rabbanan hold that even though the Levona is not tethered to the mincha, a kavana of pigel for the Levona will passel the mincha. Why? For Rabbanan ki amrinan ein matir mefagel as a matir. I agree to that concept, but hanan mila hecha. That's if the carbon was not crystallized in one keli, and we're going to shortly have an example of that. But a mincha, remember at the beginning of the parak, at the beginning of the Masechta, Rashi told us what ikvu means in reference to a mincha. It means that the mincha was crystallized. We had a discussion if after you put the mincha, the klisharis, if some of it were missing, could you go bring extra flour from home? So the Gemara said if placing it in the klisharis is ikva, it crystallizes the mincha, that means it's this mincha with this levina is a unit now. It's a one singular unit. And you can't just dilly-dally, you can't just arbitrarily decide to replace some of the flour. So if you lost some of its flour, this mincha is chaser and you can't fill it up with other flour. Because it's ikfu. This mincha now is crystallized. It's exactly these components. So there, the levina is very much part and parcel of the mincha because they were crystallized together. And I consider them one and the same, Dr. Rabbanan, and that's why the machshava of being maktir the levina chutz lizmano will impact even the avoda on the kamitz of the dough. So it seems like everybody's maskim that ein matir, mefagel matir. The question is, do you look at the Levona and the koimetz as two separate matirin? Rabbi Yosy looks at it as two separate matirin because they're not tethered to one another. You could be makir of the Levona before or after the koimetz, but the Rabban holds since they were crystallized together in the klishares, it's one thing, and therefore it's going to be like the emurim and the dam, and pigel will work. Okay. But we just learned a clue that there would be a case where even the Rabbanim would hold one matir is not going to be mefagel the other matir, and that is the following case. On Shavuos, there were two kivsei atzeres that were brought. There were two carbon shlomims with sheep, and those two korbanos, once they're processed, they're matir the shtei halechem, which were the two breads that were brought. In the Beis Hamikdash as well, right? That's the Shtei Lechem of Shavuos. So the question is, what happened if while he was processing this sheep, he had kavana to eat the second sheep chutz lizmanai? There, even the Chachamim agree that that's ein matir mefagel matir because they're two separate animals, they're two separate entities. They're not crystallized as one carbon. They're two independent karbanos. Zok the Gemara weiter. Amar Rabbi Yanai. We're going to now go to a little bit of a different subject. Amar Rabbi Yanai, likut levona bezar posel. So when we were discussing the sequence of how a mincha is processed, I skipped out an important part because we know first the oil and the flour are mixed in a bowl. Then they put levona on top of it, and the carbon crystallizes, like the Rabbanan said. Then you move the levona off to the side, so that the kohen can take a kmitza from the pure flour and oil, and then that koimitz is placed into a klesharis, which is then placed on the mizbeach. Then they gather up all the levona that was sitting on top of this mincha, and they're maktir the levona on the mizbeach separately. So the question is, do you need a kohen to gather up that levona? Is that considered one of the primary avodos that has to be done exclusively by a kohen, or can a zar do it? So Amar Rabbi Yanai, likut levona bezar is possible. My timer, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah mishum haylocha naguba. Likut Levona is halacha. How is it halacha? Halacha means bringing it over to the Mizbeach. The Teretz of Rashi, very simple. A Yisrael gathers up the Levona, and then he leans over and passes it to the Kohen. That means the Kohen was able to take one less step on his way to the Mizbeach. Even though the Yisrael didn't even take a single step, but he still transported the Levona a certain distance. So Zog to Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Mishum Halacha Naguga, it has the status of Halacha, because Kosover Halacha Shaloi Beregel Shema Halacha. Even though you're not walking with it, you're merely acting as a pivot point, and you're passing it from point A on your right side to point B on your left side, but it is traveling 3 or 4 feet. That's Halacha, V'Halacha B'Zar Psula. So it follows, it's the avodah of Halacha, and therefore it's Psula B'Zar. Amar Rav Mori Afanan Nami Tadina. I also am going to bring you a raya. I'm going to bring you a raya that likut of the Levona by Azar is going to be an avodah. It's classified as an avodah, and therefore it's Psula B'Zar. Because we learned this not too long ago. Zaklal. We're talking about what avodas you can have a machshava of pigolin that will passel the carbon. Zaklal. Kol HaKoimetz, avodah number 1 that we said is keneged the shchita. V'noisen b'kli is keneged the kabbalas adam. V'hamoilach is keneged the halacha to the mizbeach. V'hamaktir of the koimetz is keneged the zrikas adam. Those are the 4 primary avodas. Frag the Gemara, let's understand why each of these 4 avodas parallel to 4 avodas by a regular behema carbon. B'shlem koimetz, that I understand, hainu shoichet. Why it's shoichet? Because you're separating, by the koimetz, you're separating the chelek hagavoya from the chelek of the shirayim, and when you're shechting a carbon, you're separating the chelek of gavoya, which is the dam, because that's allowing the dam to escape, from the rest of the animal. Moilech is obvious. Hainu moilech. You're moving it, you're transporting it from point A to point B. Maktir, hainu zarech. I understand as well. But this noisen bechli that you're telling me is connected to Kabbalah Saddam, they're not really equal avodas at all. My covet, what exactly is this moilech doing? Ilema, so what is this noisen bechli doing? Ilema mishum the dami la Kabbalah, it's like Kabbalah, because either way you're placing something into a container, they're not the same at all. Kabbalah means you're standing like a goylem, and the liquid fills it automatically. That's Kabbalah. You're being mekabel. Midami hasa memela. That's Kabbalah. Haga kashakal v'rami. Not Kabbalah. You're putting something in. That's not a Kabbalah. That's a Nesina. So that shouldn't be Kabbalah. So if that's the case, why is placing the koimetz into a keli considered a primary avodah? It's not parallel to the Kabbalah. It must be for a different reason. Ella mishum dekivan d'loisogi lei d'loi avad la avodah chashuvahi. Since it's got to get done. It's something that's got to get done. Whether you can identify it as a parallel to a specific avodah is irrelevant. It's something that needs to get done to process the carbon properly. Therefore, al karchach mashvala kikabbalah. That's why it's called Kabbalah. So, based on this logic, we're saying that any necessary step to process a mincha is an automatically an avodah that's psula b'zar. Well, guess what? The likut of Levona, it's got to get done. So Achanami, Kivan the Loisagila, the Loavad la Avoida Chashuvahi, Akarchach Mash Velei, Kihailacha. So you have a raya that it's an avoida that a zar cannot do it. Zok Gemara, you don't have a raya. Loi, La'olam the Dami la Kabbalah. Really, the Nesina of the Koimetz Bechli is Dami la Kabbalah. And you don't have a raya that any necessary step is an avoida, so you don't have a raya that gathering the Levona is an avoida. You had a problem that the Nesinas Koimetz Bechli is not like a Kabbalah. With the Kakashaloch, Hasam and Mela, Hacha Kashakal Varami. But the core accomplishment is the same. Michti Tarvayu Kedushos Klihu. They're both being Mekadosh, the dover that we're going to present on the Mizbeach in the Klesharis. Who cares how it got there? Mali Memela, Mali Kashakal Varami. The main point is that this dam that's got to get gespritzed has to be in a Klesharis. this kaimitz that has to be placed on the mizbech got to go in the klesharis. That's an equal zach, and therefore we don't have any proof to the premise that any necessary avodah automatically takes on the din of an avodah.
I maybe not remember. We definitely talked about the Kabbalah's ha-koimitz, whether it could be on the ground. You know, we talked about it. Whether it has to
If
be
the keli could be in the ground, or if somebody has to be holding the
so
keli.
So by Kabbalah's Adam, we know that the kohen has to hold the klishoris. What was the maskana by the Kabbalah's koimitz?
There was actually a shaila if a coin has to hold it or has to be on the ground.
So don't look at it.
But either way, it's not a Kabbalah. You're putting it into the keli.
That's from
not dripping in.
That's from the perspective of the coin that's doing the Nesina. But the coin that's doing the Kabbalah is the same exact thing.
So what are you trying to tell me, that the Nesina B'chli is an avodah?
Yeah.
Then no one argues that.
Not Nesina.
Everybody
argues.
argues.
The Kabbalah.
So everybody holds that's an avodah. Our question is whether or not the gathering of the Levona is an avodah. The question is, why is the Kabbalah's clear avodah? Is it because it's a necessary step, or is it because it resembles Kabbalah? If it's because it resembles Kabbalah, then you don't have any raya to gathering of the Levona. But if it's only considered an avodah because it's a necessary step, well then gathering the Levona is also a necessary step. But that's not a question. For sure, placing it into the keli is an avodah. That's mafurish in the Mishnah. So that's not under dispute. The question is why, and why will determine if we can apply that reasoning to gathering of the Levona. Zog to Gemara weiter. Shachat shnei kvasim. So this was the case where even the Chachamim agree that these are two different material. So we're talking about the two kvasim that were shechted on Shavuos, and the way it works is you have two kvasim and you have two chalas, and shechting these two kvasim are going to be matir to two chalas. But this is what he did over here. Shachat shnei kvasim lechel achas min achalais lemachar. So he shechted kevish number 1, and he had kavanah to eat chala B tomorrow. He shechted kevish number 2, and he also had kavanah to eat chala B tomorrow. But chala A, there was never a kavanah about. So once one of the devorim hanitorim becomes pigol, the Yosei automatically spreads to everything. So zog to Gemara, or a similar case by the lechem aponim, where there's two bazichin, and there's also 2 rows of lechem aponim. So hikter shnei bazichin, lechel echod min hasedarim l'machar. They had mine only to eat 6 of the 12 breads tomorrow. Does it make everything pigel, or just the areas that we were thinking about? Rabbi Yosy Omer oisei achala v'oisei aseder shechishav alav pigel v'chayavin alav kares v'asheni posel v'ein by kares. Now, this is a big chiddush, because if it's pigel, it's pigel. Half a carbon becomes pigel, but that's going to be a discussion in the Gemara. However, the Chachamim Oimrim, what are you talking about? Zev is a pigel, v'chayavin alav kares. Once you had a kavanah pigel to eat any part of the carbon, the whole thing is pigel, which seems at first glance much easier to accept. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna said, I'm going to take Rabbi Yosy a step further. He said a chiddush, that only the affected item is what's going to become pigel, but not the not affected item. So I'm going to stretch that a little bit. Amar Rav Huna, Amar har Rabbi Yosy, pigel b'yerech shol yamin, loy nispaglo der yerech shol smoil. A guy had kavanah to eat the yerech yamin chutz l'zmanoi, it's not going to answer the yerech smoil. Now you're going to ask me, if during the shechita he had kavanah to eat the yerech yamin chutz l'zmanoi, it's the whole animal. True. But the case is, we're not talking about part of shechita. We're talking about after he shechted it, and you already separated the yerech yamin from the yerech smoil, and now he's doing the zrika, or the kabbalah, or the halacha, one of the other avodas, where at that point we could say that the legs were already separated, and you have a separate yerech yamin, and you have a separate yerech smoil. If his kavanah is only to eat the yerech shon yamin chutz zmanoi, that will become pigel, but not the yerech shon smoil. Similar to what our Mishnah says, only the seder of lechem aponim that you thought about will become pigel, or only the lechem that you thought about would become pigel. My time, what is the svara for Rav Huna's understanding of Rabbi Yossi, Iba Yisei Mesvara, V'iba Yisei Mekra. We might have a svara, we might have a pasuk. Iba Yisei Mesvara, because loy adifa machshava mimaisa hatuma. It shouldn't be any different than if the animal became tamei. Ilu it michad ever, if one yerech becomes tamei, mi it milekule, would it make the whole animal tamei? So this is another proof positive that we have to be speaking this whole shaila is after they were separated. Because if it's one animal and a share touch it, the whole thing becomes tamei. So this is only a discussion when they were severed from each other. So that's the svara. V'boy say makra. It says in the pasuk, as far as by pigel what halach is, that aneve shoichelas mimenu. Mimenu is a miyut. Avoy noitisa will be chayiv chorus. Mimenu v'loy machaveri. Only the part that you had the kavanah of chutz lizmanayon will there be a chayiv chorus, but not any other parts. Frank the Gemara. Eisei Rab Nachman le Rav Huna. Rab Nachman had a kash on Rav Huna. I can't accept that on one animal, if you had kavanah of pigel on the right side, it's not going to make the left side pigel. From the following brisa, we have a brisa that we don't know who its author is. We know it's talking about, again, the kivsei atzeres and the shtei alechem. And it says in the brisa, la'olam ein boikaris, there'll never be a real pigel, ad sheyifagel b'shteihen. You have to have a kavanah of pigel on both the breads. That means you have to have a kavanah on both of the breads to eat them chutz lizmanai. Now it doesn't mean both breads completely. It means the kazayis, as long as there's a kazayis total, which means even if my kavanah was to have a half a kazayis of bread A and a half a kazayis of bread B, chutz lizmanai, that will make everything pigel. But b'shteyen in ba'achas mehen loy. Dafka, if you had kavanah of an achilas pigel of both, not on one. So let's think, who is the author of this brisa? Mani. Who's the author of this brisa? Ilema Rabbanon. If it's the Rabbanon, it can't be the Rabbanon, because the Rabbanon hold afilu ba'achas menami. Even if you had kavanah of achilas pigel only on one, they're automatically toast, right? So it must be that the author of this brisa, although it's written in an anonymous fashion, the author must be Rabbi Yossi. Elapshita Rabbi Yossi. So now let's think about it. If you would agree that an animal that has two legs to it, we consider it as one goof, then maybe you could conceivably make an argument that when I look at the two breads and I'm having a half a kazayis of each one, we'll look at it as one piece. Why? Because I'm thinking to make it into one piece. It's really two different pieces, but my machshava wants to make it in one piece, so it should be a full kazayis. Now, if you would at least look at something that's really one piece as one piece, then maybe I would be able to stretch that to say that two pieces with your hopes and wishes and dreams and aspirations will be considered one piece to be able to make it pigel. Ella, if you're going to tell me, Rav Huna, that even something that's literally one animal, we don't look at it as one animal, as Rashi says, Elai Amrit is like fuzzy logic. Elai Amrit, Gabi Yerechos, the Mechad Guf are literally from one Guf. You're considering them as Trey Gufininu. And therefore, Vim Pigo Zu, Beloy Zu, Loinis Palgo Zu, well, the Gabi Chalois, Ki Irvan Lechel Kazayis Mishten, there really are two separate breads. You want to be ma'ar of them, that you'll have one kazayis from both of them, mitzaref. How could you even conceivably argue that it would be mitzaref? It doesn't make sense. Mima hanyer iriv machshavosoi l'mahav echad gufa tvei mechiber zevach deloy mahanilu liratos. It doesn't make any sense. How could your machshava, your virtual connection, be more powerful than a real connection? So therefore, this does not. It doesn't make sense that Rabbi Yossi would hold that the two Yerechos, if one became pigel, the other one wouldn't be. Now, the Leimahani Lirtos is not the right word. If you look at the base, it's Leimahani Lehit Starif. That makes much more sense. So, Zok to Gemara, Hamani Rabbihi. If this was Rabbi Yossi, checkmate, you have your proof. But guess what? This is not Rabbi Yossi. It's Rabbi. It's a third party, has nothing to do with Rabbi Yossi and the Chum, and therefore you don't have a raya. Because Rav Huna said it's halacha and Rabbi Yossi. This price is Rabbi. You can't bring me a raya from Rabbi. Where does Rebbe say anything that's relevant to this question? Titania, Hashoichid is a keves, lechal chati zayis michalazu. So this again is talking about the shtei alechem, the same case that we were discussing a moment ago. Hashoichid is a keves lechal chati zayis michalazu. V'chein chaveroi lechal chati zayis michalazu, from the same challah, right? Rebbe Oimarni, I say shezeh kosher. I'm sorry. He shechted one carbon to eat a chatzizayis from bread A, and he shechted another carbon to eat a chatzizayis from bread B. So you don't have a kazayis of any one lechem. Therefore, Zok Rebbe, this is kosher. There's no problem here. As Rashi says, lechel chatzizayis michal zula mocher, shezeh kosher lahakter emur v'lechel bosher. It's not pigel. Du lo chishev ela chatzi achila v'chatzi mater. There's a chatzi achila on the chatzi mater, because the whole mater of the two animals or the two breads, and in each one there's only a chatzi achila. Okay, Zok the Gemara in Rebbe, Talmud Omer chatzi chatzi. The whole reason why it's kosher, it's because it's chatzi achila and it's chatzi mater. But what if we would have said kezayis mishtehen, which is exactly the brisa that we learned there in the Beis, mitzdarif, it will be mitzdarif. So you see, Rebbe is perfectly parallel with the brisa that we looked in the Beis. So therefore, you can't ask me a kasha on Rabbi Yosy and prove anything about what Rabbi Yosy holds by this case, because this is not Rabbi Yosy talking; it's Rebbe talking. Okay, we'll stop here and we'll mamshech tomorrow.
There were two
Right.
kvasim that were brought?
Yeah,
In the Shtei
I
Alechem?
mean Rashi, there were many more, but there were two kvasim that were designated for the shtei alechem. Okay, everyone should have a good tevach, a mazel tevach.
Good tevach.
And the Rosh should help that the 20 to 40 centimeters should be a nothing burger.
Is it the same
Yes,
here?
Hashem.
For Toronto, for Metro Toronto, 20 to 40 centimeters.
It's green.
Just finished. Okay, second. Wow.
Oh, now he shows up.